Hello and welcome to the podcast, the second podcast of My Granny is Irish. I'm Laura Perrins and my guest today is Robert Clarke of the Alliance for Defending Freedom. I just want to say thank you for all of you guys watching last week, David Shipley. It was a really interesting podcast and thank you for your comments, all of which I think I have read, including the one mean one. David Clarke is a lawyer with an Alliance Defending Freedom in the UK, and they are always doing great work over there. Robert, let me tell the viewers what you are doing to defend our freedom.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I'm a barrister by training. That's my background. And I practiced criminal law in London
Oh,
originally, and then I
okay,
joined
I
AD.
was there. What I have to ask you, what chambers?
So I trained at 2 Bedford Row,
Yeah,
and then moved towards some medical misconduct,
okay.
nursing midwifery council, professional
Because it doesn't
misconduct.
pay, right? The criminal bar doesn't pay.
That's the challenge. Yeah, that's the challenge. I think
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was a phenomenal training ground. I think in
Yes.
terms of, working from very early until very late, being
Yeah.
handed briefs, sort of at the last minute that you had
Yeah.
to internalize and then turn up at court and deliver, doing that, in some cases 6 days a week. I mean that with Saturday court.
I've done
Um,
Saturday court. You can get
yeah,
off your high horse.
yeah, it was a fantastic training ground. I
Yeah.
learned a lot, and actually, the sort of to bring that almost full circle, I
Mm.
didn't when I joined ADF in 2014. I joined in Vienna, Austria, which is our international headquarters.
Yes.
I joined and I thought, do you know what? My criminal law background is not going to be very much use. I'm going to have to do a lot of learning. I'm going to have to get up to speed when it comes to public law, human rights, European law, and so on. And I did have to do some coming up to speed, and I still do. But sadly, in many ways, my criminal law background has been more useful because what we do is advance the right to live and speak the truth. We
Yes.
do that through the laws, so that's participating in the lawmaking process, but also engaging in litigation. And so it means, when we have, this is just news from last week. Someone like a Scottish grandmother, 75-year-old Scottish grandmother, arrested for holding a sign outside of a hospital, which said, and wait for it because it's truly shocking, which said, coercion is a crime, here to talk only if you want. That was it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
she wasn't, engaging with people. She was holding her sign, offering to talk if you want. And for that, she was arrested. And so it's cases like that we get involved in. That's here in the UK, but also internationally. And of course, there is an international dimension to all this as well. So yeah, I was in Vienna for 11 years, and then I actually moved back to the UK just a couple of weeks ago, for various reasons. But part of it is really just seeing some of the challenges in the UK right now, and wanting to be able to be a little bit closer and to join with the team that's based here in doing some of the work to really try and advance the right to speak freely and to be able to live in accordance with what's true.
Yeah. So this case of Rose Doherty, this is to do with these buffer zones. It's a Scottish case, isn't it? And Scottish do have they do have a different legal system to England and Wales. But there's a few, essentially, I think these buffer zones are around all abortion clinics, are there now, or at least most, or especially if or indeed hospitals. And that legislation was it pushed through by Labour or Conservative? If you just explain then this issue of buffer zones, I think there might be an equivalent in Ireland. I'm not sure. There's a restriction around hospitals, but they were pushing for them for years, and I think then the legislation went through. I forget if it's under Conservatives or under
Yeah.
Labour.
Yeah, no, you're right. The significant push over several years, but by a very vocal
Yes.
constituency that made the argument that these zones were necessary
Yeah.
to prevent harassment or otherwise criminal conduct, um, which is just disingenuous because of course we already have laws in these jurisdictions that criminalize harassment, that criminalize assault, the
Mm.
sorts of things that people were claiming to be happening. And
Yes.
so the government, the previous government in Westminster, actually commissioned a study to say, are these zones necessary? And if we go back to that study, the conclusion was that they're not necessary, that even to the extent that there are any isolated reports of
Yes.
challenges in front of abortion facilities, the existing criminal law is adequate to deal with that. And in fact, there is no widespread evidence of
Yes.
significant disruption or anything like that outside abortion facilities. And if you look at some of the groups that are involved in this, they have codes of conduct, they have expectations for the people who go and who pray or perhaps engage in conversation. And I think you get a clear picture if you actually look concretely at what it was that has taken place in some of these cases. So, for example, take the case of Rose Doherty. Grandmother there, standing solitary with her sign,
Yeah.
offering a conversation. And so just the mere offer of a conversation now being criminalized in what is actually a very broad area. So the area under the Scottish Act is about 200 meters.
Yeah.
And so this is a significant area. These are public streets around hospitals. The position in England is not vastly different now. Originally, it was regulated on a kind of per local council basis. And so there were these local zones.
Yes.
And then now we have the national zones that have come into force around every abortion facility in
Okay.
in
Yeah,
England.
no,
And
I
so these are pretty
remember.
wide.
Yeah, I remember the messaging around it. It was very much, because, even, I think Christians or pro-life people in Britain, you wouldn't be able to justify, and I certainly ones were like, outright harassment or getting in women's faces because they have that British sense of fair play. But so the messaging was all from the people pushing these buffer zones, I remember, was always like, yeah, that it was sort of American style, serious harassment, getting in their faces. And as you say, once the surveys or research was done in that case, I mean, the evidence for that simply wasn't there. And also, because social media exists now, I mean, if that was happening, it would be all over the internet, right? It would be all over Twitter, and the pro-life cause, I think, would lose sympathy. I mean, it's quite small anyway in the UK, but it would lose sympathy very quickly. So this was something different, as you say. This is like they got it through anyway, and it works either on a national basis or a local basis. And as you say, it's a buffer zone where basically I, as a criminal lawyer, was also. It seems to criminalize prayer itself, criminalize, what if somebody might be thinking, or indeed, I was wondering, like, does it even criminalize mere presence? So if somebody was just standing there, perhaps looking thoughtful or committing a face crime, as they might say in 1984, would that be caught by the legislation? Because if it does, it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't. I mean, and we don't have to go into the realm of hypotheticals because
Yes.
we have real cases. And so,
Mm.
I've mentioned Rose. Rose had her sign, but let's talk
Yeah.
about Adam Smith Connor. And maybe some people listening to this will be familiar with this case. It was the one that the U.S. Vice President mentioned in his Munich Security Conference speech.
Yes.
Adam Smith Connor, he's a father. He's a military veteran. And he was arrested and has now been convicted before the magistrate's court for praying in the vicinity of an abortion facility in the south of England. The interesting thing there is he was praying in his head. So he wasn't saying anything. He was praying in his head, and he was approached by council officers. He was asked what he was doing. He honestly explained, and that was sufficient for them to ultimately prosecute
Because
him.
he what's relevant there is he lost a child through abortion. Was that right? Was that right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's and I think that's something that whether the people listening to this, whether you're a prayer, whether they're a not prayer, I think just understanding why Adam does what he does is important. And he many years ago paid for an abortion for his girlfriend at the time, and he regrets that. In fact, he says now that that's the biggest regret of his life. He carries that with him, and as a result, he chooses to go. He wants to go to a place of significance, to the vicinity of an abortion facility, and to pray for his
Yeah.
son, who was lost to abortion, and that's why he does what he does. And so, my hope is anyone who hears that, whether they're someone who prays, whether someone who not prays, can understand the significance and perhaps the reason that he does what he does. And yet, that was enough for the
Well, I
authorities to
think,
go
I
around.
mean, what you said there unfortunately, I think so. Now you're getting into the realm of they're not just criminalizing, speech. As we know, harassment and things like that has long been criminal. And now you're basically criminalizing speech and prayer. And when you say, we hope people will understand why he does what he does. This I think is the problem maybe with Europe and the UK and Ireland is the falling away from Christianity because people, don't necessarily understand that. They don't understand the concept of prayer and why people do it. Like I remember some of the reaction to, Charlie Kirk's memorial a couple of Sundays ago. It wasn't we'd already seen the outright celebrations of his death, which was bad, and I have condemned. But the reaction to some of the prayers by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Vice President himself, there were a few commenters, very well known commentators on the left, who actually they weren't. Well, somebody in Ireland condemned it as a Nuremberg rally. I mean, that's how far we've got. This was a university lecturer at Maynooth University. Um, but the American commentators, in fairness, if in a thoughtful way, actually were just saying like, I don't understand this. I feel completely foreign to this. Now, me looking at it was thinking, well, this is very American. This isn't your regular, funeral down in St. Peter's and Paul's or your month mine. But you know, sort of making allowance for that, this idea that, certain people, they just don't really understand Christians or Christian practice, or that prayer is inherent to that. And I think that could be a real problem going forward because, it's religion is obviously a much stronger in the United States. I think it is enjoying a revival. I mean, the president of the United States yesterday, President Trump issued a message on the feast of Saint Michael the Archangel, including the prayer, which, even 5 years ago, if somebody said that was going to happen, they would never believe you. If we had President Harris, she will celebrate Happy Beaver Day or Happy LGBT Day or Happy Fly a Kite Day. But it was the idea that an American president would be able to issue that statement is, as I said, I think 10 years ago you wouldn't have thought would happen, but is. So the Americans are enjoying I think a Christian revival, but the Europeans, not so much. And this is leads, I think, down the line to these kind of criminal offenses. These aren't civil wrongs; these are criminal offenses. Essentially, criminalizing prayer and criminalizing this idea of bearing witness. Because I think I remember somebody saying, when these cases were coming up, the sort of clever argument was like, well, you can pray for this anywhere, right? You can go down to your church, you can do it at home, which is true. But bearing witness, which is a Christian, I think, virtue, you really have to be close to the area, right? You have to be close to the wrong that you have committed, or not that you've committed, that is going on. As you say, and people say, well, it won't make any difference, but that's the whole point of bearing witness. You don't think it'll make any difference in the here and now, but you are saying that somebody cares. Somebody has stopped going about their ordinary business to bear witness to this great wrong. In this case, abortion. But as so many people don't even understand the basics. And I mean, in the UK, you still have an established church. The king is still head of that church.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, religious literacy is a huge challenge. And I mean, you saw that in some of the, cross-examination in these cases and some of the
Oh,
questions that were
interesting.
put. And if you read the judgments, I I don't know that you necessarily read that and think, okay, this is a court that understands, what motivates these people and what drives these people. And yet, of course, that is vitally important. And so I think there is a huge gap there when it comes to religious literacy. But of course, it goes beyond the prayer aspect because we also have Rose, we also have, for example, Livia Tossici Bolt, who has been convicted for holding up her sign, which says "Here to
Yeah,
talk if
I
you
think
want."
I think I wrote about that myself. So just give us just again the facts of that case. I wrote about that was back in April this year.
Yeah, so she was put on trial. The facts that led her there, she was in the vicinity of a place where abortions happen, and she was holding a sign. She was on public property, and she held a sign that says "Here to talk if you want."
Yes, this was
Uh,
in Bournemouth. This was
that's right.
outside of Bournemouth. Yes, yeah,
Yeah. And the evidence that she gave to the court was that, she's held that sign on occasion. She's had conversations with people on occasion, but she's had conversations on all number of topics.
yes,
People pass through. She's befriended people who felt lonely. She had conversations with people who live in the area, people who are just passing through. And on the day in question, she was approached, and on the basis of that sign, she was ultimately convicted of um, a crime under one of these local censorship zones,
okay,
and was ordered to pay significant prosecution costs. So, in fact, the local council spent somewhere around, in fact, I think in excess of £100,000 prosecuting her. There's a local council spending £100,000 instructing lawyers to come down from London and to prosecute her in the
that's
magistrates court.
incredible. Yeah,
And then when she was convicted, sought to have an order from the court that she pay that sum. The court didn't order her to pay the full sum, but still ordered her to pay a significant amount of money for standing there with a sign saying "Here to talk if you want." And so I think that there's the religious aspect, there are the prayer cases, but there's also a set of
yeah,
cases where it comes to just the offer of a conversation. I mean, what could be more British than offering someone a chat? Here to talk if you
yes.
want, which of course
Although
anyone's free to decline.
yeah, I mean, well, as you say, everybody is anybody's free to decline, and it clearly isn't harassment. I think also though, and I wrote in my piece, it's interesting in terms of what exactly are the courts or the people who pushed for this law, or indeed the workers at the abortion clinic afraid of? Are they afraid that a pregnant woman who's walking into that clinic may change her mind? Right? Is that the fear? And if it is the fear of, that this woman goes over to again this perfectly civilized woman who's just holding up the sign, and they were perhaps looking for a sign or looking for someone to talk to, and they do change their mind. I mean, why it's sort of depressing and frightening to think about why would they consider that a bad thing? I mean, do you think that's part of the motivation?
Yeah, and I think it also exposes some of the lies that
Yes.
come out when it comes to language here. And so, so often, those who work for the abortion facilities, they will describe these people, like whether it's Isabel in Birmingham or Adam, as anti-choice. Um, and yet they're the ones that are calling the police to have them arrest and remove individuals who, in some cases, are offering a choice, or just a chance at a conversation. And
Yes.
so it's a gross distortion of language, which I think we often see when it comes to this issue in the UK.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean, I definitely think coercion plays a part, at least in a minority of cases, and if not coercion, then desperation, and I just think those who are afraid that a woman might change her mind before she enters an abortion clinic could do with thinking why. Why would they be disappointed in that? Why are they so afraid that some pregnant mother might change her mind? So I mean, overall, you clearly do, ADF deal with, as you say, the prayer cases, what I would call simply bearing witness cases, or really, prisoners of conscience. Really, this is their conscience who is that is driving them to commit these hideous offenses of standing outside, abortion clinics and not saying very much. But the UK have had a huge amount of coverage now in relation to free speech. There's the Free Speech Union as well handles some of the cases. So, I mean, what if you're feeling with how just the right to to have an opinion and to speak that opinion in the UK is, I mean, the creator of always known as the creator of Frother Ted, Graham Linehan, was obviously arrested when he arrived in Heathrow by 5 police officers. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't look great.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it is not overstating it to say that there is a free speech crisis in the
Mm,
UK. I'm a lawyer. I try to be careful with words, and
yes.
when I hear people say things like that, my first reaction is that sounds like hyperbole. But then when you look at it, when you think about the fact that there are people being taken off the streets or at least summons to courts for silent prayer, for offering conversations, for online posts. I think the Times reported something like 12,000 arrests last year for online speech. So
Yes.
you just think that this is a staggering number in a country where,
It is a
um,
staggering number.
let's
Yeah.
just, I mean, let's just be honest. There are some, very real challenges, and I'm not sure that online speech and hurty words online is going to be the top priority for the police, or the second priority, or the third priority, and yet it appears to be commanding significant attention, significant police resources. You see the number of officers that attend to these things. You see the specialist units that are set up to deal with them. You see calls for increased powers when it comes to sentencing or particular offences. We, of course, have the Online Safety Act and additional powers for Ofcom when it comes to regulating platforms online. And so you see this whole machinery at play. And there's another case. Maybe I'll just mention it because I think it kind of illustrates
Oh,
one
yeah,
of the
no,
things
please
that we
do.
see.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not an English case, but it's kind of a global case, and that's the case of Billboard Chris. I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff online.
No.
He's a Canadian father, and he was a financial advisor until he saw what was happening when it came to gender ideology, how it was infecting schools, impacting in particular women and girls in Canada and the world over. And so, to cut quite a long story short, he initially paid for a billboard in Canada that said "I heart JK," JK Rowling, modeled
Yeah.
after a similar billboard in Edinburgh train station. This is some years ago, and that got taken down as offensive. And he eventually decided, well, um, I can share my message and I can't take it down if I wear it. And so this father, former financial advisor, decided to start wearing billboards. And the main message that he wears is children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And
Yes,
he wears
yeah.
this and he travels initially around Canada, now other places internationally, and engages in conversations with people on the street. And of course, people come up to him. Some people are very happy, some people don't like it. And at some point, because of some of the interactions he was having, he started to film some of them and post them online, and he's built quite a following. Just interacting with everyday people on the streets when it comes to this question of gender ideology. Anyway, I mention him because he, as I say, very active on X in particular.
Yeah.
And he posted something last year. He shared a Daily Mail article. So I guess there's the connection to the UK. He shared a Daily Mail article which criticized, and he echoed that criticism, the appointment of a transgender activist from Australia to a World Health Organization panel of experts. He says this person
Yes.
shouldn't be serving on this panel of experts and took issue with it. So just to recap, this is a Canadian posting
Yeah.
on essentially an American platform X,
Mm.
sharing a British newspaper article published by the Daily Mail. So this post goes on. Now, the Australian adult in question um, didn't like this post and so made a complaint to Australia's e-safety commissioner,
Yeah.
which is about as Orwellian as it sounds. And the e-safety commissioner investigated this post. There's all kinds of other interesting things in the background, but investigated the post and made a determination that it violated Australia's Online Safety Act. And the e-safety commissioner has the power to issue a takedown notice backed up by substantial penalties, about $800,000, to the platform in question, which it did. And so Australia's e-safety commissioner issued a takedown notice to X, saying it had to remove this post because it constituted cyber abuse directed at an Australian adult. That's the section of the act. And Billboard Chris, filed a challenge against this in the Administrative Appeals Tribunal in Australia.
Yeah.
X actually joined this challenge. They geo-blocked the post to comply with the order. Although
Right.
eSafety, and I'll put a pin in this, we can come back to if you want. eSafety
No.
in other proceedings had argued that their orders should have global effect. So it's not enough, they originally said, to geo-block posts in Australia to comply with Australian law. It will only be satisfied, they previously argued, if you take the content down globally. Now they appear to have stepped back from that position because they have lost some legal challenges. But anyway, in this case, X geo-blocked the post in Australia. It was still available here, but in
Yes.
Australia, the content was not accessible, and X then filed its own challenge. And so these cases were heard together earlier this year. And I'm pleased to say we were successful.
Oh, that's
The
yeah.
censorship order was overturned, but it kind of shows you, Chris is a Canadian posting
Mm.
on X, which is an American platform, and that wasn't enough to keep him safe from this censorship czar in Australia.
The censorship industrial complex, I think, like I like to call it, is truly frightening in terms of, the amount of regulatory bodies that various states are setting up. And they always sort of team it as online safety. So in the UK, you've got an Online Safety Act, or Ofcom, which regulates the broadcast media. um, and then, of course, they have loads of independent NGOs, like there's something of strategic dialogue with fancy names or not so fancy names, like Hope Not Hate. So, Hope Not Hate don't like somebody that is saying something they don't like. So that person is suddenly, a fascist or a purveyor of hate. And then someone, some other minister will pick that up, and then they're hit with the, so Ofcom might decide to regulate what they may have said on TV. And it's always painted as just sort of these independent people who are just fighting the hate. But no, this is to me a censorship industrial complex. Where they usually start off, I said, by labeling what you might have to say as far right or fascist, and then you have, but then they always, standing behind them is government power, state power, that either put pressure on Facebook, who have just been exposed as censoring, thousands of Facebook pages, I think, during lockdown, or Twitter or whatever. And in Ireland, we have, you're probably aware, where has it gone? Oh, and they always have sort of Irish names, of course, in Ireland, because it makes it sort of sound less offensive. But it's commissioning na mean. A Gail Gore can correct me on that. Ireland media regulator. What of course, which doesn't sound as offensive or aggressive as the Ministry for Truth, which is exactly what it is. And it's populated by lots of little O'Briens who, I don't know, will watch what you say, watch what you post online, and will make your life very difficult if you say something they don't agree with. And if you say these people are in Canada, they're in Australia, and at the moment, this is why I think, you always have to be careful with how much Americana you consume. But like, really, that First Amendment, is doing its work, because it's the you can pretty much, you can say whatever you want, more or less, in the United States. Even the defamation, I think you have to do with intent, with malice. The test is very high. But unfortunately, as you said, you cannot, the it's sort of like whack-a-mole. To me, it's like whack-a-mole. It's not any one big flagship law, right? Hence the word complex, right? It's a series of laws, then a series of regulatory bodies, and then this is all adopted by the government. And it's not like, I don't think right-wing governments have been particularly strong on this. There was a conservative-led administration in the UK for what, at least for, I think, the previous 12 years, maybe even longer. And they didn't improve the position at all. So, do you see, clearly Elon Musk taking over Twitter was, I think, a bit of a game changer. If we didn't have that, things would be a lot worse. But I guess the reason why they don't like you saying, on things that they have not been approved of, is well, it's just the same as what Orwell says in 1984. If freedom means anything, it means the right to say something that other people don't want to hear. But nowadays, like, people get really offended really quickly. If you say something that they don't like to hear. Why do you
Yeah.
think that might be?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think it's. I think that that's at the heart of it, and it touches down into kind of questions of psychology and sociology and probably theology. But I think
Yeah.
at some level, there is at least the element of, well, let's come at it from two places. Let's come at it from kind of societal and then the individual level. I think at the individual level, we've kind of gone through a period. My generation grew up being told, you're the best, you can do anything you want,
Okay. Yeah.
and everyone is the same. There are no, differences that matter, because we're all the same. And if someone is, saying something that upsets you, then they're in the wrong. They're always in the wrong, because they've upset you, because our feelings take priority, right? Feelings are
Yes.
more important
Yes.
than
That was
truth.
feelings were a thing. The
Exactly.
in the previous 10 years. Yeah.
Exactly, it's this idea, and
Yes.
you see that everywhere. You see that in appeals to emotion when it comes to speech. You see it when it comes to gender ideology. That's about
Yes.
elevating feelings
Yeah.
over truth or over biological reality. And so I think when you enthrone feelings, then you at least lay the foundation for this kind of you can't say that culture where hurty words, people, even this phrase. And I'm reluctant to use it, but there are people who use the phrase of sort of psychological violence, and
Oh,
normally
yes.
what they mean by that. And I'm not talking about some kind of sustained campaign of harassment, over.
Yeah. That's
I'm
diff
talking,
yeah.
it's used to essentially try and use traditional harm, physical harm language
Yes.
to apply to me feeling upset or me feeling offended,
Right.
which of course is never what was intended. So I think that at the individual level, the enthroning of feelings over truth or feelings over fact, I think that has some significant responsibility. And then I think in terms of just leadership, I mean, leadership matters. And you look at how our countries have been led in recent years, and I think there was a key point in 2016 onwards where we saw a couple of different things happen. So one was we saw the Brexit referendum, of course,
Yeah.
and then another was the election of Donald Trump the first time round. And the interesting thing with both of these events, so these are outcomes that were that many of those in power did not see coming. So you look at Brexit, not every, but the vast majority of politicians in the media campaigned for a Remain, including the then prime
Yes.
minister who called the referendum. You look at the US election of Donald Trump, he was considered the underdog, the outside candidate, not fit for office, and wasn't going to be elected, and yet we ended up in a position where Donald Trump did win the election and where the majority voted in favor of Brexit. And so I think at that point, many of those in power who didn't see those things coming had to make a choice. And one of the choices they could have made is to look at that and say, okay, I didn't see that coming. Obviously, I need to recalibrate a little bit
Yeah.
how I see things, and where maybe the population is at on some of these questions and issues. But they didn't do that. What did they
Yes.
do? What they did was essentially conclude that the people were tricked. That was the conclusion that came. That
Yes.
they voted for Brexit because of the misinformation. They
Mm.
voted for Trump because of Russian misinformation or interference. It was essentially the argument that these people, and it maybe isn't phrased in those ways, but these people are stupid and were misled by misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, all of these
Yes.
terms. And it's interesting, if you do kind of, on Google, you can kind of track the use of terms over time. If you look at some of those terms like misinformation, disinformation, less so malinformation, that's kind of newer, I guess.
That's your one.
It really is around about 2016 and then the years that followed. And of course, then we see an acceleration into the pandemic. It's round about then that we see those terms take off. Terms that were
Yeah.
very rarely used before, if at all, then suddenly becoming mainstream terms that everyone uses. And there is somehow this you might think manufactured consensus that, okay, the problem here is not X, Y, and Z. The problem here is all the misinformation. And so we need new online powers. We need the EU's Digital Services Act. We need the Australian Online Safety Act. We need the British Online Safety Act. We need the Irish Hate Speech Bill, a hate crimes bill. We need
Yeah.
all of these things in order to clamp down on these bad words and the misinformation in order to try and somehow, restore what was wrong.
Yeah,
Uh,
restore order. No, I mean, I think you've touched on. I mean, I think you've laid it out really well. I mean, in terms of, as you say, this enthroning of emotions, that definitely had a huge impact on censoring speech, but also self censorship. So we've
Absolutely.
talked a lot about, state imposed censorship and the chilling effect that has. But the drop down or the trickle down effect of that is the huge amount, of self censorship that goes on. So, well, just going back to facts over feelings, because people don't want to be seen as mean, right? Most people want a quiet life. I always remind, you know, people like yourself or other people who are involved in this, we're the exception. Most people in England and Ireland, especially, I just want a quiet life. I don't want to have to, argue with people over this. So when you say, well, you can't take, you can't sort of object to the transgender agenda at all because that makes you mean, that's actually quite persuasive. And it was Ben Shapiro's phrase, facts,
Don't care
facts
about
over
your feet.
feet. Yeah,
My
facts
facts
don't
don't care
care
about your
about your
feet.
feelings, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, now they did a lot to turn that away. Feeling no, people never cared about the facts, right? They didn't care about biological reality. They did that. It was feelings that trumped. Now, clearly things have turned around in the United States, but I think self censorship as well is the big win from the censorship industrial complex. So, touching on two Irish cases, yeah, the state regulator, as I said, is commissioning the meme, which is just annoying. And they say on their website, they're Ireland's agency for developing and regulating a thriving, diverse, creative, and safe and trusted media landscape. And they're responsible for regulating broadcasters, video on demand providers, and online platforms established in Ireland. And they have a wide ranging remit, also includes supporting and developing the Irish media sector. In other words, they fund left wing media outlets, but they will definitely not fund any right wing media outlets. I mean, this is a huge state funded body for Ireland that is essentially regulating what people say online. But that's bad enough. But as I said, this sort of imposed self censorship on where you don't even have to have this a threat from the state, I find also quite frightening. So in Ireland, a very well author, you probably know him, is John Boyne. He wrote The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and he writes LGBT themes, although he was on the same side. He supported J.K. Rowling in the transgender debate. And he was offered one of the what's called a James Joyce Medal in one of the leading universities, my old university, University College Dublin, at my old debating society where I spent far too much time, the Literary and Historical Society. And they had written to him and offered him this award. And then this other controversy blew up where he was essentially blacklisted out of an award. And suddenly these are now the debaters, the people who want to explore ideas in the LNH, have decided that John Boyne, LGBT writer, he's just too radical. He doesn't approve of the transgender agenda. So he was just memory hold. They just said, actually, we're not going to give you that award anymore. Which I just find, well, it was just incredibly disappointing. And again, this is a decision that these people will have made themselves. The students within the LNH, and of course, Robert, the depressing thing is these are the elites. They will go on to be the lawyers and be the judges, and because I see all my old mates are the lawyers and judges, and they all think that cancelling John Boyne is some sort of win. But the person who they didn't cancel, because I went onto their website and seemed to be perfectly worthy of one of these awards, was Alistair Campbell himself, which arguably arguably was an architect of the Iraq War, which I think is a lot worse. And the fallout from that and the loss of life from that was a lot worse than saying, I don't agree that men should have access to female spaces. But this is the kind of thing that you're dealing with, both on a low, well, it's sort of a lower level within the universities that I still think, in a way they do this self-policing and self-censorship, right? The state doesn't even have to threaten, right? They have people out there doing the work for them, the snitchers, what I call them. And it isn't because I'm not asking people to say something that they don't agree with, but they probably, I mean, I don't think anybody was really on board with this transgender train, but a lot of people got on it because they didn't want to be seen as being mean.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very difficult to tackle that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think no one wants to be mean. And I don't think the
Yes.
vast majority of people, are setting out to be mean. And I think what we have to remember here is that there is a very small group of activists who push
Yes.
these things. I think
Mm.
that there are others who maybe come alongside or who get taken along. But the group actually actively um, very vocally supporting and pushing some of these things, it's a small group. It's a small group of activists. I think that's important. And yet, what they've been able to do by pushing through some of these laws, by silencing dissent, creating a culture of a certain kind, is to sort of create almost an inability or reluctance, of anyone to sort of even hazard it. People don't say things. It's not even that people don't say things because they're worried that saying it might get them into trouble. They don't even know how to phrase it in an acceptable way.
Yes.
Am I allowed to say woman here? Am I allowed to? And they can't keep up. I mean, even say, I remember I saw the AP style guide. Of course, this
Yeah.
is shapes reporting around the world.
So this is
Widely
Associated Press, yes?
Associated Press,
Yeah.
their style guide, and they updated it at some point. I haven't looked at it in the last year or so, but they updated it a little while ago, and they often use the phrasing of sort of preferred and avoid or not preferred, and they had in there avoid the phrase preferred pronouns. So avoid that phrase preferred, which,
Oh,
and I looked at that and I thought, hang on a minute, I thought that I thought that was what we were supposed to say. I thought
yeah,
that
so it
was
can't be preferred pronoun, it's just pronoun, right?
It's spot on, exactly. So now, so whereas maybe a few years ago the idea was you have to use the language of preferred pronouns, they say then no, that's old fashioned. Now you have to just use the word pronoun because if you say preferred, it suggests that there's a choice and that it's
Yeah.
somehow volitional, which of course it is. And so I just use that as one tiny example of like the pace of change.
Yeah.
And how when you have this coming, that's going out to journalists, that's going out to editors, copywriters, all over the world. And then you have similar things on sort of, the policy side. And then you have these laws when it comes to online speech or public order legislation in public spaces. And it should be no surprise with this kind of patchwork blanket and this complex that you've talked about.
Yeah.
That people, they don't even know how sometimes to phrase the question without, being sure that they're not going to get shot at on some of these different, and yet these, difficult issues are exactly the sort of thing where we should be able to put something out and say, well, I think this, or have you thought about that? Or how should we respond to, this issue that we're facing?
Yes.
And yet it's in precisely those areas where the conversation has been shut down and quite deliberately so by I think a small group of activists.
Yeah, but the problem with the small group of activists is, well, first of all, maybe I'm too negative and I don't give our own side enough credit, but I certainly think I mean, I'm using the term very broadly. A lot of people who let's say break left are embedded in really key institutions. They're embedded in the law, they're embedded in universities. They are generally, well, certainly now with Labour, embedded in the government, and they wield real power. And look, I think it's always been the case is that it is small activists that get the job done. And this is sometimes my problem. Well, there's two things. Sometimes my problem with the silent majority. People say, well, this isn't what the silent majority. Yes, but if you're silent, people ignore you. this is the problem. I understand that you've got the dinner to do, which is, a genuine priority, and that you want a quiet life. And in fact, sometimes I complain that everything is too political now, right? Everything's political. You can't even watch a football match now without some fool taking the knee. You cannot get a minute peace and quiet. But this is the problem. If you are silent, then you are ignored. Which was always my is always my big complaint with the silent majority. But perhaps this is why we're seeing the censorship industrial complex, because the one way the silent majority can no longer be silent without having to take to the streets every weekend or give up their job or their lives is through social media, right? Is airing their views on Facebook or airing their views on Twitter. But it seems now that they're not even allowed to do that, right? Because even if you do that, then there's some regulator somewhere or somebody who works in your office who's going to refer you to your employer, even though this is a completely private, you're on Facebook, it's got nothing to do with your job. And also the big difference is that they get fired for things that, or they at least get hassled for things that they say are true, like men cannot become women, or a nation state should be able to control their borders. Whereas when the left talk about a cancel culture, which they completely perfected, remember they were policing Halloween costumes. That's what was happening 10 years ago. I remember the scientist who I think was a Nobel Prize laureate who was fired for saying, it was clumsy, for saying, women in the lab cry. He lost his job over that. Yet you can get people, celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and there's a bit of debate about whether or not that person is really a good person to be a nurse. Well, no. No, they at least deserve, if they're going to put their public celebration online, they should probably at least suffer some kind of public penalty for that. So I think that the way the silent majority has, had the temerity to express their opinions through Facebook or through Twitter, that obviously I think is causing huge panic in various in governments both in the UK and Ireland. So where do you see the big threat coming from now, or is there just a lot coming?
Yeah, I think many of the pieces are sort of already in place.
Yeah.
So at the European Union level, I mentioned the Digital Services Act. This establishes the
So
European Union.
that's passed, and is everybody so this will apply to Ireland? Is it one of these that it directly applies, or domestic legislation has to be brought in?
Yeah, so it's regulation. It directly
Okay.
applies, and it does a number of different. It's 100 odd pages, or about
Yes.
70 odd pages. So it does a lot of different things. But in short, it establishes a censorship industrial complex for the European Union. And there's just two things I'll point to, because I think they explain kind of what's coming in quite a clear example. So one is, it defines illegal content, which then the platforms have to remove, as content which is illegal under either union law, European Union law,
Yeah.
or under the law of any one member state.
Oh.
And so this is essentially a kind of lowest common denominator. So if you in Ireland post something that is illegal under German law,
Wow.
and we've seen some of the things happening in Germany, then your post could be removed by the platform pursuant to a request under this Digital Services Act, according to German law. So again, you see this kind
Wow,
of
that's I
cross-border.
didn't know that. That is scary.
So that's so absolutely. That is very concerning, because you have kind of a race to the bottom. You have kind of a lowest common denominator approach to
Well,
speech.
if you are in the business of censoring opinions, right, then you just have to
You choose your forum.
focus on the most left-wing European government, right? Lobby that government to pass the most stringent law they can in relation to speech, and then that applies across the union.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
that is so.
now you've said it out for them. But it's right. I mean,
Oh,
that's
they know before I
they
said it.
know. Yeah, they know.
They're working on it as we speak. So, I mean, out of all of the European unions, which do you think is the most stringent speech law? Is it Germany or?
Gosh, Germany's certainly up there. I mean, I think my colleague Paul Coleman wrote a book, I think it's in the second edition, called Censored. And it really charts these hate speech laws. I think that there's an appendix at the back that kind of just goes through
Right.
country by country. And I
Yeah.
think, what the challenge is that it's sometimes a question of the law itself, right? Hate speech is an undefined term. These countries try to define it, and
Yes.
often, we saw the Irish definition, which was circular and referred to hateful content or inciting to hatred.
Yes.
And then we have definitions that talk about offense, but that's subjectively defined, and so on. So we have a real issue with definition. There's not just definition; it's also then the enforcement of that. And so, take Päivi Räsänen. She's this Finnish member of parliament. She's now been going through this process for getting towards a decade, in respect of a tweet. She posted a Bible tweet as a photo of her Bible. It
Oh,
wasn't like
yes.
an
Yeah.
Instagram photo; it was an actual photo of her actual Bible. And she directed it at her church's leadership. Now, she's a member of parliament. She's a grandmother. She's a medical doctor. She posts this online. Now, by the way, this was before Elon Musk took over Twitter, and it
Yeah.
wasn't taken down by Twitter under its previous ownership. So, you know, it was doing okay until it was reported to the authorities in Finland by someone, and the police investigated, and they took it very seriously.
No, I
They
know. They
interrogated
do.
her
They
over
do. There's
hours.
nothing
Um,
more serious than a tweet now. Nothing.
Exactly. So they hauled her in, a sitting member of parliament, former minister,
Yeah.
hauled her in, interrogated her, asked her questions, what she meant by that, what does the Bible say about this? And they ultimately, in a reasoned report, decided that um, there was no basis to charge her. But that was
Yeah.
overridden by the prosecutor general. So the police advice was no charge, and that was overridden by the senior prosecutor in
Wow.
Finland,
Wow.
who prosecuted her. She was acquitted unanimously at the district court. Prosecutor
Mm.
General appealed it to the Court of Appeal. Again, unanimously acquitted at the Court of Appeal. And the question was, is the Prosecutor General going to try and go a third time? Which, of course, this is alien to the British system, to the Irish
Yes.
system. But in Finland and many civil law jurisdictions, the prosecution can appeal an acquittal. And so they did. And so it's been appealed to the Supreme Court of Finland. In fact, it's going to be heard there towards the end of next month. And so now this grandmother, this medical doctor, member of parliament who tweeted something, getting on for a decade ago, is going to
Yeah.
go to the Supreme Court. And I think actually this is to come back to your point about the chilling effect and the silent majority. If you talk to her and if you listen to her in terms of, why she is ready to stand and to defend herself, and she does so with a grace and a humility. She says
Yeah.
she does it because it's important for her. Of course, she wants to clear her name, but
Yeah.
she also knows it's important for so many others who don't have maybe the resources or the platform that she has. Maybe they don't have the sort of political backbone that she has over many years
Yeah.
in parliament, who a call from the police or a knock on the door from the police is utterly terrifying. Now, I'm
Yes.
not saying it isn't for her, but she's lived a life that has prepared her in some ways for this.
Yeah.
And so she says she's doing this, yes, to clear her name, but also because she wants others to know you can share the truth. You can share your faith. You can do so without fear that the police are going to come and knock on your door. And so that's going to be decided at the Supreme Court of Finland next month.
Yeah, well, I think as well, I mean, this is the other thing. So, I mean, I try to look at the cases in detail and you sort of think, well, that's going to be successful or it's not going to be successful. But the point is, even if, eventually you get acquitted, as Mark Stein would say, it's the process is the punishment, right? I mean, again, especially if you're just ordinary person, right? I mean, the knock on the door, as you say, can be terrifying. Then you get them all coming through in their high viv jackets, which I object to. I'd prefer could you at least wear your traditional dress, British police officer? And then they'll bring you to the station and they hold you in the cell, and it's just constant, right? It is. So even if you end up being acquitted, it is the process that is the punishment, and also there's fines to pay and lawyers to pay and the rest of it. But I think just maybe just to touch on it finally, when I in the UK, there's been a huge allegation of, two-tier justice. And like you, being a lawyer in training, and I do have quite a lot of faith in the English criminal justice system. I would look at the cases closely and see, well, look, you can't compare those two offences. This was a violent disorder and that was, a public order act. But I think over the last 12 months, it does seem to me that anything that could be considered left wing, it never results in a conviction. But anything that could be considered right wing does. So, I mean, Lucy Connolly is the obvious offence, although she pleaded to the offence and they only appealed a conviction, or they only appealed a sentence. But there was I think a Labour councillor in East London who was acquitted after a jury trial of saying, being in public or at a demonstration and using the phrase, we should slit their throats. And I mean, what do you think of the charge of two-tier justice? Is it either too simplistic, or do you think there's something to it?
I think what we've seen through the cases that we've been involved in, is there is an issue when it comes to, I talked about religious literacy, so just
Yeah.
understanding, the view someone might hold. You look at, criticism of gender ideology, and you look at how that's been policed, and even that, I hesitate to say, why should criticism of an ideology be policed? But
Oh, but
it obviously
yes.
has been policed.
Yeah.
And then you compare that with, police response to, other groups, other criticisms, other kind of protests or assemblies and so on. And I think it's hard not to draw the conclusion that there is an issue here. And so I think there's, one of the things that we have asked for, in the past is training for police officers.
Yeah.
Training for police officers when it comes to the right to freedom of expression. What does that actually mean? I think, because it's I think it really is root and branch in the sense of we have some laws that are vague. We have some
Yes.
laws that open themselves up to abuse in a way that laws shouldn't. I think we also have an issue when it comes to, sometimes understanding of those laws. I don't want to just keep throwing cases at you, but they kind of present themselves. Pastor Dia in Bristol, he's engaging in some street evangelism.
Yes.
He was assaulted, by some people in the streets, and the police are called. They come. The individuals that assaulted Pastor Dia are there off to the side. They're identified. The police do not make any efforts to obtain their identity or to detain them in any way. They're unknown to this day, but they arrest Pastor Dia, who himself had been assaulted. And so you see things like that. And I think that's, there's maybe a legal framework question, but there's also a police training issue there when it comes to freedom of expression. The fact some people may not have liked what he had said, even if they turned up for the purpose of making that complaint, the fact that some people didn't like, that's not reason to arrest somebody. And so we have this situation where there's a legal framework question. I think there's an enforcement question. And then, of course, we have to ask questions when it comes to prosecution policy and so on and
Yeah.
so forth.
Well, this is it. It doesn't. It's not just whether somebody's convicted. I mean, I think whether they're granted bail or not, right? That does have an influence. Um, Peter Lynch, who ended up taking his life in prison. I think I don't know. The inquest is ongoing, but I would imagine the idea that he wouldn't get bail before his trial would have had a huge influence on his plea. And the other thing that annoys me, by the way, if you do, going to give you some legal advice here, is what a lot of these tweets are being prosecuted under Section 19. I think publishing or distributing written material of the offences or the Public Order Act 1986, which requires that it must be written material. Now, I am not convinced a tweet or a Facebook post is written material. I have raised it before, but I don't know if that's been tested in court. But because in 1986, obviously, social media didn't exist, and this act has now become very, very useful for the police when it comes to policing tweets on Facebook. But I am material to me is I don't think the internet or Facebook or Twitter is material. It's written, I guess, but I'd like I don't know, maybe it has been tested in court. But it'd be interesting to see. I'd like to see the case law on that. If there isn't, someone needs to take that test case.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, what it goes back to is just this question in terms of this patchwork of laws, because then, if you
yes,
don't have that, then you start looking at the Communications Act
yeah,
offences. So I think I think every possible defense that can be advanced, properly should be advanced. But the framework is such that
yes.
that there are so many
Well,
different offences that,
yeah. They've covered all bases. Look, I'll probably end on this, but for instance, I always think there's a presidential election going on in Ireland now for the next 4 weeks, and the sort of conservative candidate was blocked from standing. So they now have three very very boring candidates, and they had a very very boring debate yesterday. Now you have to. The president is a figurehead. Position as well. They have zero executive power. But despite that, it's sort of been turned into a political position, which I object to. But the boring, boring debate was last night. And I didn't watch it, but I know it was super boring. And I'm just thinking, that's what they want. They would just like don't say any, they have won when that's the debate you have. Nobody says anything offensive or any way challenging or would go against the government line, or as I say, if don't say anything that will annoy the editors at the Irish Times. If you do that, you know, Ofcom or off whoever will be after you. And that's what they want. They want everybody. They want every dinner party to be the boring, boring debate. And every protest, every debating society in the universities to be boring, boring debate. Now, I object to that purely on the grounds that it's really boring. Um, but it's incredible. There is a censorship industrial complex, and you, obviously at the Alliance for Defending Freedom, are working very hard to challenge it, and in particular, challenge people of faith and Christians. It was as you know, it was the feast day of Saint Michael the Archangel yesterday. So we keep praying to St. Michael the Archangel, as even President Trump did, which was, I think, fantastic. And yeah, just keep working hard, Robert. I will sleep easier knowing you're out there. And thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
yeah, no, thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for having me on as well.
No problem. Thanks, Robert.